Alright, howdy folks, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to more Broken Arrow. Today we're going to take a look at the US Stryker spec. Going to be the last video like this until they release more specializations, because I've pretty much covered all of them now, including some of the ones that weren't really released or able to be looked at until this latest preview build, which was sadly only handed out to a couple of content creators and game journalists. I really wish they had maybe opened it up to more people, but sadly they did not do that. With that being said, there's still going to be 2 single player missions I'm going to showcase in a future video, as well as maybe something other stuff. If you guys want to see anything specifically, like specific combinations of specs, and take a look at how they would look in a actual deck, let me know down in the comments section. With that being said, let's just jump right into the Recon for the Stryker Cavalry Regiment. The Scouts are the first up. No cool or fancy different loadouts like that weird quad sniper loadout that the US SOF had a Recon unit capable of doing. Just a regular squad, a couple of rifles, a 249 light machine gun, grenade launcher, and a couple of these one-shot AT4s with decent penetration. Slightly more range than we've seen a couple of times in the US SOF spec, where some launchers had a 300 meter range, but there's not really much to say. They're just a recon unit that's 60 points. You can't really do too much to them in terms of customization or their loadout. The Armored Knight, which is basically an upgraded M1117 Guardian with a laser designator and 2400 view distance, which is actually kind of big. M1117 Guardian. You do have a couple options here, either just a Mark 19 or a 50 cal for the same price, or you can combine them and get a smoke launcher for a one-time sort of get out of jail capability for 15 more points. You are still down that laser des, and you are still down some view distance. It just gives you a Mark 19 and I guess a smoke grenade instead. All right, moving on to the Stryker RV, which I'm assuming stands for Recon Vehicle in the Recon tab. Kind of neat because you get the same view distance as the Armored Knight, but you do go down on the weapon system to a 50 caliber. You have to keep in mind with this, you can upgrade that to a 50 cal on the Stryker RV for 5 more points, or a Mark 19 for the same cost. A kind of ridiculous looking Bushmaster 2 does give you a little bit more capability against enemy vehicles, of course. And then last but not least, a Javelin alongside that Bushmaster, making you a pretty scary vehicle to deal with, especially with the top-down attack and that 750 millimeter heat pen. Honestly, very scary. Hopefully you can knock out their APS with those 4 rockets, or it's gonna cost you quite a bunch to resupply it. Then we can also give it a little bit of an armor buff. Keep in mind though, now it is airdrop capable. Once you put on reactive armor, that goes away, but you do go up a little bit in health. And well, interesting, something I've been wanting to see more, your speed, both your forward and your backward, do go down with just a little bit. It looks like 10% on your forward and 20% on your reverse speed. But again, you get the heat protection buff, you get the kinetic, that's the white protection buff, and heat pen is in orange, or I guess what it protects against, I should say. And you can also upgrade that again with the trophy APS system. You only get 2 APS ammo, so you can only intercept 2 rounds before you're out, and then you're going to have to hope that they run out or you've managed to get behind cover. But 2 is still better than nothing, but you are obviously paying a pretty heavy premium, taking this to 175 with the full package from just 70 as a baseline unit. Moving on to the MQ-1 Predator drone, we have 2 pylons, 1 under each wing. Standard is 2 of these Hellfire missiles. However, we can swap this for 2 Stingers on either side, giving you some capabilities against drones, helicopters, and maybe the rare jet that kind of flies into your range. And then also 2 of these Griffin missiles, which are more dedicated in an anti-infantry role due to that 20 blast radius. And the heat pen isn't great. Technically, I could see this taking out some lighter vehicles at the 70 heat pen, but it's not going to take out any heavier enemy armor. The RQ-7 Shadow, tiny little drone, really not much to say. It's going to just spot stuff for you and hopefully maybe make it back to base, but there's no customization for this one. The Stryker Cavalry Regiment's Infantry tab is actually relatively small. The combat engineers also don't have any customization available to them, sadly. They just come as they are. bunch of M4s, a couple of grenade launchers, and light machine guns. It's their shotguns and those small Ds that we saw on some of the US SOF troops already. Those are really meant for you to get in close, use that 16 blast radius, hopefully blast through some enemies that are entrenched, like infantry. And yeah, that's going to hurt a pretty decent amount. So a good anti-infantry or CQB unit. Their troopers are an interesting section. That's sort of their base unit in the Stryker Cavalry Regiment. Again, I do like the height differences that you see here. Makes them just feel a little bit less copy-pasty in terms of like, hey, you know, there's a slight difference in their height and their size. This squad has a bunch of rifles, grenade launchers, 2 light machine guns, and also carries 3 one-off AT-4 anti-vehicle weapons. It does carry a javelin. You only get 2 missiles, but this is actually not bad. For 80 points, you get an entire squad, which can defend itself pretty effectively in CQB, and it gets a javelin to deal with enemy vehicles, 750 heat pen, and you get the top-down attack at a pretty decent range. So this is actually, honestly, a pretty good bang for your buck. 80 points and the 2 ammo does mean you'll have to throw a lot of ammo supplies near these guys, but if you keep these going and ammoed up, I'm pretty sure it'll hold the line pretty effectively. Then the Troopers AA, again, no customization, which makes this kind of unbroken arrowy so far because there's so many units that do have a lot of customization. I don't really have to go into depth here. They just carry a Stinger, a medium machine gun this time, a couple of grenade launchers and some M4s. Of course, the Stinger is to deal with enemy air threats, preferably helicopters, though you could shoot at some jets and hope that they get close enough. But if they get this close, they're probably dropping some bombs on or near you, but helicopters can definitely be taken out with this at that range. Then, of course, the Stryker vehicle tab you would expect to be pretty big, and you are not wrong. It's not massive, but it's definitely bigger than their infantry tab. The M10 Booker, which I did cover in the original reveal video, it is an interesting vehicle because you can swap between this 105mm cannon or this 50mm autocannon, which you're relying on 2 very different things. This has a one-shot 6-second reload. This one fires 120 rounds. You can give it the Iron Fist active protection system. It doesn't actually add anything in terms of health. It's just a pure double APS. You can see them actually being added right there to set a turret. Looks pretty cool. It just adds 2 more double chances to get out of dodge if you got taken by surprise by some sort of tow team or like a rocket launcher nearby. But you are adding a bunch of points to the cost of this vehicle when you add the APS system. It's cool though that, and this might be part of the work in progressness of this build, this currently has no cost associated with the swapping. The M985 battleship, which kind of reminds me of those gun trucks from the Vietnam era, and you can definitely customize this. I wish some of the infantry had some more customization, but then the battleship has a lot of options instead. We can make this pretty cheeky and cheap at 35 points, and we have 3 M240s. Is that great? Maybe not. I'm kind of disappointed you can't really carry any troops inside of this. That would have been awesome. But we can go all the way up to having a bunch of tows, a Mark 19 grenade launcher, or an M250 cal in the front, or an M240. But you can still have 2 tows in this thing. And that's honestly pretty cheeky. A decent range, good pen. I mean, these aren't necessarily very bad. I would say they're actually very good for a 75-point truck that is going to explode when seen and spotted and shot at, even by like lighter artillery or the lightest of anti-tank weaponry. But you get 12 missiles when you set it up like this, or we can obviously go for anything in between, which is a whole bunch of Mark 19s if you want it to be crazy. Kind of a cheap unit once you stick with some of these cheaper versions, but I still think 80 points is actually relatively cheap when you consider this does have 2 ATGMs on the back. Of course, Strykers could not be missing in the Stryker Cavalry Regiment vehicle tab. The Stryker ATGM can first of all pick between tow 2As or tow 2Bs. You are paying more, you are getting a better bit of view range, not an insane amount, but it's a slight upgrade. But the point of this is that while your pen goes down, which you have to keep in mind, you are getting the top-down attack. And that's what's going to cause a lot of that damage. That's what's going to hopefully penetrate the weaker part of enemy vehicles. So 25 points is not a small amount of points you're putting into this. We're getting that better spotting range. but the top-down attack is honestly something I'd consider worth it for 25 points. Then armor-wise, we can do the same as on the Recon version, either reactive armor. Again, you lose that airdrop capability. You can actually airdrop this one. That's kind of cheeky. But when you do that, you do gain up a little bit of health and obviously more armor. And then finally, we can go for the APS, just like as we saw on the Recon variant. Then the Stryker ESV is the engineer support vehicle. This has a giant shovel or plow on the front. I don't believe this is going to maybe necessarily be great against mines, but this would be the way to like clear a way through rubble or push something off the road. It just looks a little cool and different. It's not going to have a ton of different things than we've seen from, for example, the Recon variant with a 50 cal or a Mark 19. We get a 50 cal and a Javelin or a Mark 19 and a Javelin. You get 4 missiles. Again, not bad. Javelin top down 750mm heat pen is pretty spicy. Reload is a little rough on 8 to 10 seconds, so you better hope that your first shot hits or doesn't get intercepted by an enemy APS. But if not, pretty decent for 35 points. This is to back up your engineers, so maybe you don't want to necessarily throw too many points in, say, a Javelin, because I can envision this thing driving up a little closer, as well your engineers are also going to be driving up a little closer. Then in terms of armor, it's the same thing. We can do the reactive armor, does the same things I've said, lose the amphibious or lose the airdrop capability. You do get the APS option as well. This might make more sense because you are, again, I think, driving this closer, dropping up those engineers. And then the Javelin is maybe less of a use in that. Maybe even a Mark 19 grenade launcher for some anti-building warfare as you are driving up in close range. Then the regular Stryker ICV, we've gone over all the armor packages. You've seen that by now. And in terms of the weapon packages, it's pretty similar. Just Mark 19 with a Javelin, an M250 with a Javelin, the Mark 19 grenade launcher, or the M250, both for the same cost. However, there is the option for the Dragoon, which then gives you a Bushmaster 2 on the back of your APC. And this actually, for 100 points, isn't even a terrible option. The Javelin, though, is maybe more of a David versus Goliath system where this tiny Stryker can take out heavier vehicles. The Dragoon is more like a BTR-82 where you mount a heavier cannon for direct support, but this thing is not going to duke it out with anything heavier like an actual armored tank. It's maybe good for dealing with enemy transports or just supporting the infantry in a closer range situation with an actual autocannon versus a grenade launcher or a 50 cal. Then the Stryker MGS, of course, could not be missing, which is a 105mm gun on the back of a Stryker. This one should have some options in terms of armor. We've seen that by now. The APS or the reactive armor, or well, the combination of the two. And then of course we also have the option to replace this 50 cal with a Mark 19. All right, moving on to the actual larger support tab for the Stryker Cavalry Regiment. First up is the Centurion CRAM. It's a C-Wiz or close-in weapon system on the back of what I believe looks to be potentially a HEMTT truck. Now, the C-Wiz is literally meant for really short-range defense. They had these set up to deal with rockets or incoming missiles on ships or even military bases. This one technically, I suppose, could deal with infantry, even they say here. I don't know if that's the best idea. You're at 1,000-meter range. I could imagine it would hurt a lot if they got into that range, but that's pretty close. We can upgrade it with the B-Kid armor, give it a little bit more health. You do get a little bit more armor. Is it going to be that important? I don't think so. It doesn't slow the vehicle down, though, which is interesting to mention. And this thing has radar, so you actually need to be worried about using this. Once you pop it, you do get more range on this weapon system. As you can see, it expands the low and the high altitude range of the weapon system to a decent degree. But when the radar is on, you can get seed aircrafted, and that's what you want to watch out for. Then the regular HEMTT, used for transportation of supplies or to drive personnel around. Give it a self-defense weapon. I mean, sure, we can give it a medium machine gun or a 50 cal or a Mark 19. I'm not really too big on these. I feel like if your truck really needs this, you're probably screwed anyway. Like, what's this really going to do besides just cost you more points? And in terms of armor, we can give it either the flatbed multi-purpose, or we can give it the armored troop transport, something we saw in one of the Russian specs that we looked at not too long ago. You do get more health, you do get more armor. Again, it's kind of negligible in terms of armor protection, The health might be okay, but it's the cutting in half the weight of stuff. So your supply capabilities with the troop transport version are going down. It would be cool to see maybe this one have more room for passengers, or maybe the flatbed have less room. It's like say 16 or just 24 or some sort of bigger offset, because this one just doesn't really make any sense to me. The health might be okay, but I'm not sure. I do like the animations and all of these things when you look at them for a little while. Then the M1075A1PLS, definitely just used for supplying. You can see there's 15,000 points. Give it an up armored version. I'm actually, again, surprised it doesn't go slower. A little bit more armor, a little bit more health. I mean, it's the same thing. You can mount some defensive weapons. Then the M142 HIMARS, obviously pretty famous nowadays, can edit a few of its customization options. We have either high explosive or cluster warheads. One more for dedicated anti-light vehicle or infantry, and this one's more dedicated towards dealing with heavier vehicles or just a larger area of vehicles. The ATACMS, this is a ballistic cluster missile, which has a little bit more range and has more heat pen. So you're kind of relying on this hitting a specific target within what you want to hit, whereas the cluster warheads, they're more for a general area. Look at the dispersion, 400 to 260 meters, and this one has a way more accurate dispersion. Do keep in mind, these clusters are potentially laser guided. And then finally, the PRSM. This is really a very accurate missile. As we go over here, we'll take a look at the cluster warheads. We're talking about a 260 meter accuracy. ATACMS, 50. The PRSM, at 1,000 more meter range than the ATACMS, you get also an extra missile, 8,000 meters, 10 meter accuracy. So you're going to be hitting basically what you're aiming for. It's expensive to resupply, and obviously you only get 2 of them, and you're also spending 50 points to even equip your HIMARS with this. You give it a little bit of armor. Again, doesn't slow the vehicle down, does give a little bit more health, gives a little bit more armor, but I mean, are we really buying this for the 5 extra rear? And like, this is honestly negligible. It's almost depressing. But for the 2 extra health, is it worth it? I don't know. I'm not sure what I feel about that. Moving on to the MML Stinger. Of course, as the name implies, carries a bunch of stingers, at least this version. Armor, again, we've seen it by now. It's the same thing. I'm not going to go over this again. You know, it's got a little bit of extra health and armor. I mean, is it worth it? I don't think so for 10 points. But the thing here, the Stinger can engage enemy helicopters and jets. It can also be equipped with Hellfires, which now makes this very capable. You might think, like, why? It has 90 mil heat pen, but it's a top-down attack. So if you get to sneak this thing up on the flank and you have 15 Hellfires to fire, you're going to be doing quite a bit of damage. And with 15 missiles, even if you're shooting at 2 different vehicles and they have 4 APS ammo, you're barely using half your ammo to kill them. It's honestly not necessarily a bad upgrade, but obviously you're taking away from the ability to deal with enemy aircraft completely, though the Sidewinder upgrade gives you 15 Sidewinders, which the bonus here is not just the upgrade in terms of, well, dealing more damage or more pen and more damage, getting a little bit more range. You're also talking about the fact that it can now engage missiles, and a little bit higher speed might help too. So this is really to deal with all aircraft and missiles, but it is going to cost you 50 more points. The Patriot Pack 3. Self-defense weapon, we've seen it by now, the standard loadout. I don't really feel like that's super necessary. And armor, I'm not even going to mention it anymore. In terms of the ammo, 8 missiles to deal with no helicopters, but to deal with jets and with, well, actually enemy missiles. Or you can upgrade that for 50% cost to get double that. You go from 8 to 16. The Patriot Pack 3 MSE is a slight upgrade over the Pack 3. You get 400 meters more range. Do keep in mind with the radar, it extends that just a tiny bit. But you also get options for a couple more missiles, either 8 or 12. So you are getting less missiles, than the Patriot Pack 3, but they do a little bit more range. And then obviously self-defense and armor package, not even worth mentioning. The Stryker MC, or mortar carrier, choose between mostly HE, mostly smoke, which obviously kind of speaks for itself, 40-20 or 20-40, or guided rounds. You get 9 guided rounds for 10 points, and these are laser guided, so a little bit more accurate if you have a spotting team available. And armor is the same as on the other Strykers we've seen, with reactive or reactive plus that trophy APS system. Moving on to the Stryker M Shorad. Pretty versatile unit, as you'll see here. In terms of armor, it's the same system as always on these Strykers. Do keep in mind the speed goes down a lot once you go for the heavier upgrade. You go from 100 down to just 80. On the weapons, we have a basic one with 4 Stingers and an M250. We can go up to a double Stinger pod, which technically isn't necessarily bad. It just full-on gives you twice the amount of Stinger ammo. We can go for some HE Hellfires on one end, which still gives you a couple of Stingers to protect yourself from enemy aircraft, while now also giving you some of these HE Stingers with a 50 blast radius, a top-down attack. They are still capable of dealing with enemy helicopters. These are actually quite interesting. I assume if you hit a helicopter with this, it's probably going to do a lot of damage with that blast radius and a slightly higher heat pen. And then finally, the APKWS/AAM. It gives you a 30mm autocannon instead of that 50 cal, which is obviously a big upgrade. It also gives you Fletcher missiles, but you still get to keep some of the Stingers as well. We've seen these before. They are laser guided, pretty decent blast radius, but low heat pen missiles that can be used against infantry, lighter vehicles, even helicopters, and at 1,300 meters, I'm not too sure about aircraft. And then finally, the Stryker SPH, which is a self-propelled gun howitzer, sort of prototype version. We can't sadly give any more weapon upgrades. We can slow it down at this point, which is I think the most mentionable thing in terms of the armor going up and the APS system. If your artillery needs an APS system, I think it's been completely misplaced, or you just got very unlucky. You do get a bunch of smoke, you get a couple of HE. The Stryker Cavalry Regiment spec does not come with any helicopters, but is obviously where I should mention you are always going to combine 2 specs to actually create a deck. So maybe it's with the Airborne, maybe it's with the US SOF. I'd be surprised if armor had anything, or it's going to be with the USMC, thus giving you a tiny amount of variation depending on what you pick, but is always going to be very important. If you don't want any helicopters, you pick armored and the Strykers, but that's maybe a little risky. Going to the Stryker aircraft though, we'll start going right from left because the B-52H is obviously some of the coolest equipment I think that they have added to this. The F-16V Viper. As with all the aircraft in Broken Arrow, there are almost too many customization options available. You get an ECM pod for a little bit more ECM protection from 5 to 50, but that's adding 45 points. A designation pod, which obviously is nice, which now gives you the ability to at least laser des for your own aircraft. You don't have to worry about there having to, your Recon or any sort of vehicle on the ground actually being needed to do that for you, because you can do it yourself. On the outer pylons, we can mount a bunch of different AIM-9s, AIM-120s to deal with enemy aircraft, a different combination of either 1 and 3, 2 and 2, full focus on the AIM-120 AMRAAMs, or maybe a half focus on the AIM-120 AMRAAMs, just try to be a little cheaper, or 4 Sidewinders or 2 Sidewinders, depending on how cheap, how expensive you want to get. And of course, the Sidewinders are shorter range compared to the AMRAAMs. But yeah, you can even go for just 1 Sidewinder and 3 AMRAAMs. So lots of different options there. On the middle pylons, this is where you can put your bombs, though technically you could go for some more AMRAAMs if you're really interested in just dealing with any enemy aircraft. This is going to be able to get quite expensive though, if you really want it, if we put on the more expensive options every time. But we can also get some JSOW Glide cluster bombs. We can also get some laser guided JDAMs, 2,000 pounders by the way, which again, you can now laser guide into the target yourself, or 8 of these Stormbreaker low drag bombs with decent blast radius. And then finally, the inner pylons. So you can go for more fuel tanks. It's always nice to have. You do a 300-second time over target. A Stormbreaker pod of 8. We can go for 4 500-pound JDAMs. We can go for 2 2,000-pound JDAMs. Or we can go for more of these JSOW cluster bombs. You can really load this thing up and make it almost 500 points, but is this multi-role thing really what you should be going for? Personally, I find that a little crazy. This makes more sense to me, maybe even remove the designation pod, and now you're really on this anti-air focused loadout, and you're not looking at a 500 point plane. The F-16 CJ, we can add a couple of seed missiles to this one, which is going to be what you need to deal with enemy radar AA, or some ECM pods, or a lot of fuel tanks, giving you twice the time over target from 120 to 240. Whatever you do on the 16 CJ, you're always going to be equipped with 2 of these seed missiles, which means you don't necessarily have to focus on getting a bunch more. I mean, technically, if you really wanted to go crazy, you can get 4 of them. 2 of them, I feel like, is the minimum. 4 definitely makes this more of a dedicated anti-radar aircraft. In terms of the outer pylons, though, we can get some sidewinders for more helicopter-based defense or offense. We can get some more AMRAAMs to fight enemy aircraft, a combination of AIM-9s and AIM-120s, or again, this weird offset of 1 to 3. I actually don't really understand how that works in terms of weight, but I guess it makes sense. And then finally, 4 AMRAAMs to, again, if you wanted to do that, go full crazy on a sort of combination build with anti-air and anti-radar. The F-16C Fighting Falcon, we have a bunch of different options on this one as well to make it kind of a jack of all trades. In terms of ECM, we can go for a 10% ECM pod. It does cost 40 extra points. We can go for some AMRAAMs, either 2 or 4, a combination of A9s and AIM-120s, the same like sort of offset 1 AIM-9 and 3 AIM-120s, or just fully focus on 4 sidewinders or the cheaper 2 sidewinders. And then on the middle pylons, we can go for some Maverick ATGMs, either 2 of them or 6 of them if you're feeling lucky, a couple of Rockeye cluster bombs, dumb unguided bombs, bigger unguided bombs, and a few of these Snake Eyes. We have some more AMRAAMs if you want to go for an anti-air version. And on the inner pylons, we can then mount the same cluster bombs, the same Snake Eyes, some unguided smaller or bigger bombs, or some more fuel tanks to staying over target a little longer. And then last but not least, the B-52H Strato Fortress. This thing is, I don't know how this is not going to get shot down unless you are very careful with it. You can give this a bunch, just an absolute, I can't zoom out enough, a whole bunch of 500-pound dumb unguided bombs. Then we can give it up to 8 of the ALCM cruise missiles. Kind of trying to get, again, a shot of them all being there. 10,000 meter range, just delivering missiles from afar and turn away, hopefully, before the enemy can react with their anti-air or their air superiority jets. We can then add another 12 under the wing pylons, which is kind of ridiculous. Then we can go for a bunch of JASSMs, which are a little worse in terms of their blast radius and their heat pin, but they are laser guided, allowing you to be more accurate. We have the laser guided JSOWs. These are going to be cluster bombs, but these are also laser guided, so with some accuracy, these could do a lot of damage. We have laser guided 2,000-pound bombs, or if you want to cheap out, you can just go for a couple of the unguided 2,000-pound bombs as well. And of course, for 25 points, you get a designation pod, which is going to actually allow you to do your own spotting and your own lasering of enemy targets, which will just basically give you free accuracy. We've come to the end of the Stryker Cavalry Regiment spec, and we've basically seen every single one of these specs in detail to a pretty large degree. So if there's anything you still want to see from this, do let me know down in the comments. Otherwise, we're going to go do some of these single player missions in the next video. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll catch you in one of those next ones.